Welcome, history buffs, to a journey into the heart of ancient Greece, but not just to admire its glory and beauty. Today, we will explore a darker and more disturbing aspect: torture. In the meantime, subscribe to the channel if you are interested in historical videos. Now let's start. Can a state plan a death so cruel that even the screams become part of the spectacle? In ancient Greece, cruelty was not always the product of chaos or anger. It was often the result of cold calculation, careful, methodical, theatrically orchestrated planning. Among the most disturbing of the instruments of death was the bronze bull, also known as the Sicilian bull, a hollow metal sculpture used to roast the condemned alive, slowly and in front of a crowd. Although associated with the tyrant Phalaris of Acragas in Sicily, then a Greek colony, this macabre device was the product of Greek ingenuity. According to Diodorus Siculus, it was the craftsman Perillos of Athens who conceived it, proposing it as an instrument of justice. The bull was hollow, with a side door for the insertion of the victim. Once the fire was lit under the structure, the bronze would heat up and roast the condemned. But Perillo did not stop there. He built an acoustic system that transformed human screams into the bellowing of the beast, making the agony a sound spectacle. Justice thus became performance, terror a staging of power. And Perillo himself, in a sinister parable of poetic justice, was the first victim of his own ingenuity. Phalaris, to test its effectiveness, had it locked inside the bull. Then he pulled it out still alive, only to throw it off a cliff. Punishment as a stage, a recurring theme in the Greek world, not only in fire, but also in humiliation. Among the lesser-known, but deeply disturbing, punitive practices is Raphanidosis. Aristophanes, the Athenian comedian, speaks of it in his comedy The Clouds, 423 BC. It was presumably a form of corporal punishment for sexual or moral crimes, which consisted of the forced insertion of a large horseradish, raphanos, into the anus of the condemned, often in public or ceremonial contexts, a punishment that combined physical suffering and social humiliation in a culture where reputation, sophrosini, sophrosine, was an integral part of the citizen's identity. Ancient commentators suggest that Raphanidosis, however grotesque, may have been a real, if rare, practice. Its purpose was twofold: inflict pain and symbolically destroy the dignity of the individual. In a context like the Athenian one, public shame could destroy more than a death sentence. Other punishments, however, were cold and ritualized. The best-known example is the poisoning by hemlock, made immortal by the death of Socrates in 399 BC. Unlike theatrical tortures or mutilations, this method, although terrible, was presented as civil and legal. Hemlock, a powerful neurotoxin, progressively paralyzed the body while leaving the mind intact until it caused suffocation. In the Phaedo, Plato solemnly recounts Socrates' last dialogue, where he discusses the soul and the afterlife before drinking the lethal potion. His last words were addressed to his friend Crito. "We owe a rooster to Asclepius. Don't forget it." An enigmatic phrase interpreted by some as a thank you for liberation from earthly life. Hemlock was not used to punish a tyrant or a traitor, but the most famous philosopher of Athenian democracy. This reminds us that even ordered justice can hide a silent horror, a cold, clean, but no less devastating death. Alongside humiliation and death, there was mutilation, among the most serious, blinding. This punishment was reserved for traitors, sacrilegious people, or political enemies. It was irreversible. It deprived the person of sight, but also of their role in society, where seeing meant participating. Eyes were burned or pierced with sharp instruments, sometimes partially to inflict shame, in addition to physical harm. The blinding was not just revenge. It was social erasure. The victim was no longer a citizen, but a shadow. Then there was stoning, lithobolia, a collective punishment, not carried out by an executioner, but by the crowd. Stoning expressed the condemnation of the polis, which purified itself by physically eliminating the source of disorder. It was foreseen in the case of serious crimes against the gods or the state, blasphemy, sacrilege, treason. The laws of Draco in the 7th century BC contemplated death for almost any crime. But stoning was different. Not only death, but social and spiritual erasure. Sometimes the corpse was denied burial. Finally, the most terrible of punishments, starvation in the pit, the Barathron, a rocky abyss outside Athens where those condemned to very serious crimes were thrown. In some cases, they died instantly. In others, they were left alive to die slowly. No ceremony, no audience, no words, only silence and oblivion. The punitive practices of ancient Greece appear to us today as cruel and inhumane, but they were far from random. Behind every act of legally sanctioned violence lay a profound logic, a deep-rooted cultural thought, sometimes even philosophical, that defined not only the concept of guilt, but also that of humanity. Death in the Bronze Bull was not only torture, but a display of state power, a message that made pain an integral part of political communication. Raphanodoses, however absurd and grotesque in our eyes, showed how shame could be used as a weapon to control public morality. Hemlock poisoning, in its apparent composure, revealed instead a more sophisticated and ritual side of punishment, where the democratic order found justification even in the suppression of its most brilliant minds. And hunger in the pit, like stoning, stripped the condemned not only of life, but also of memory, name, and belonging. These forms of punishment, although different in their execution, had one thing in common. They were all designed to go beyond mere physical elimination. They aimed to strike the social soul of the guilty party, to isolate him from the civic body, to transform him into a negative symbol, to be exposed, feared, forgotten. Suffering thus became language, ritual, and instrument for the preservation of order. What is striking is not only the cruelty, but the awareness with which this cruelty was exercised. In a society that invented philosophy, theater, democracy, the use of legal violence takes on a disturbing meaning. Even in the most enlightened civilizations, justice can be transformed into spectacle, law into terror, legality into revenge. Reflecting on these pains does not mean judging the past with modern eyes, but asking ourselves how far a civil society can go to protect itself. Where is the boundary between justice and barbarism? When pain becomes a message, does law become corrupted or strengthened? Democracy, so praised by the Greeks, has perhaps shown that even in a system based on consensus, power can choose ruthless ways to maintain its balance. That's all for today. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. Your opinion is very important to me, and if you like, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos. See you next time. Bye.